Hey everyone, Steven here, and welcome to my little library of horrors. Well, it's a couple days late, but Happy New Year, everyone. It's officially 2026. And with 2025 thankfully in the rearview window, while behind the scenes, the year was definitely pretty tough, especially in the November, December time, as it always is, holiday depression comes into mix in with my regular depression, along with the stress of the holidays and all of that good stuff, so, I'm just happy that time of year's over and looking into the new year. But as far as my reading year went, it was actually really good this year. I read a total of 18 books, which isn't really necessarily a goal of mine. I really don't like setting a goal. I've mentioned it before. I think it adds too much unnecessary pressure to reading, which is supposed to be enjoyed. But I'm also not against the idea of a reading goal, as I think it also helps people make sure they get in their daily reading that way, as they're working towards something. So, again, I'm not against it. It's just personally not for me. But anyway, enough blathering on. I'm going to go ahead and get into my list. I'm going to go from the book that I enjoyed the least to my personal best read of the year. So starting off at the bottom of the list is going to be Let the Right One In by John Avid Lindquist. Again, I have butchered that name completely and I apologize, but I try my best. So, Let the Right One In is a story about a young boy named Oscar who befriends a girl in his apartment complex who only comes out at night. Later on, as the story goes, it's unveiled that she is actually a vampire, and Oscar starts to form this, I don't want to say infatuation, but starts to grow feelings for her. So, I personally really did not enjoy this book. I felt like it was a gigantic slog to get through. The characters were incredibly flat and two-dimensional. Nothing really happens. The antagonist is not only pointless, but the author tries to force him into being a sympathetic character, and based on who he is, that's just not possible at all. The climax, there's two climaxes, the first one being completely absurd, to the point where I laughed out loud, and the final climax of the story was building up to be something wonderful, but all of the action ends up happening off-scene, which leads ultimately to a very disappointing ending. There was also another aspect to the book that I really didn't enjoy. I won't go into detail here. If you want my full thoughts on the book, feel free to check out my review. And any other books that I mentioned that I've reviewed will be linked in the description down below. So, ultimately, I really did not enjoy this book. And I think if you want to check it out, I would probably go see the movie. I haven't seen it, but it's got to work a lot better than the book did. Coming in at number 17 is Letters from the Dead by Campbell Black. And if you happen to notice the nail polish on my nails, my daughter got her first set for Christmas this year, so of course Dad had to be the obligatory test dummy, so yes, my nails are painted, and my toes are as well. But, can't say no to her. Anyway, despite the really incredible cover, I went into this story expecting it to be a sort of Romeo and Juliet-esque ghost story. Instead, it was something that I'm personally not a huge fan of story-wise. I understand that, it's stuff that happens, and of course it's horrifying, but when you're going into that kind of subject matter, I think you really need to know how to handle it, and I feel like the author with this didn't do a great job of it. I really felt like he focused a lot more on being like, look, I can write like Stephen King, instead of trying to make more interesting characters and a more interesting plot overall. But yeah, again, I've reviewed this, so if you want to see my full thoughts, feel free to check out my review on the channel. But if you're a collector, obviously this is one you want for your collection simply for the cover alone. But if it's something you've wanted to check out, I've heard some people enjoy it, so I guess go for it. But as a personal recommendation, I'm going to say pass on this one. Coming in at number 16, we have Camp by Alan Saperstein. Probably one of my favorite covers in my collection, which unfortunately leads to my overall thoughts of the book, which was gigantic disappointment, as there was so much potential with this book, with so many wonderful seeds being planted that ultimately were never bloomed. Camp is a story about a doctor who is a chiropractor who ultimately believes the chiropractic medicine is the new medical miracle to solving every single person's problems. So he ultimately sets up his own summer camp, and it's a summer camp for troubled boys. So he wants to experiment on the boys and show the world what chiropractic medicine is capable of. Very interesting and original plot, which, like I said, unfortunately has this whole bunch of threads that never get tied up in the end. I guess without kind of rambling on about it, the best way I can describe it is a reviewer, I should say, on Goodreads summed it up the best. This book feels like the author had his first chiropractic appointment and wanted to rave to the world about how awesome it was. And I genuinely couldn't put it any better. Again, if you're a collector, this is a must-have for your collection. But if it's something you've been wanting to read because it sounds interesting, I don't know, maybe you'll get more out of it than I did, but overall, it felt very scrambled. Just get a sip of water here. I'm going to try and keep the coughing down to a minimum in this video. Next up, we have In the Belly of the Beast, Letters from Prison by Jack Henry Abbott. So I picked this up at a thrift store last year when I was out with my uncle, and I found it in the free book section. I have heard briefly about this book here and there throughout the years, and I do like to throw in some nonfiction throughout the year, kind of as like a palate cleanser, and as a way to sort of broaden my knowledge within other interests that I have. I've always been kind of interested in, prison shows and things like that. So when I found this book, I was like, oh, I should check this out. And overall, it's not bad. It's definitely dated. The way prison is described in here now, I can't say it doesn't exist today. I don't think it's as prevalent as it was back in whenever this was written. I think it was like the late 70s, early 80s, I believe. Just double check here. Yeah, it looks like 1982 here. So yeah, early 80s. But yeah, at some points it was interesting. It was definitely cool to see how, prisoners spend their time in their cell and different parts of the jail and things like that. But a lot of the time it felt like a lot of kind of with the victim mentality. The person was clearly a criminal. Yes, he had a rough childhood and grew up in a tough surrounding, but I also believe that while we're not responsible for our trauma, we do have the power within to sort of work on our own healing. But again, I'm not a person to judge. I can't say I didn't live his life nor his circumstances, but I'm just simply expressing my opinion as a reader. It just felt very, very woe is me at times. Definitely, and sometimes got a little too philosophical, too religious for me. So, overall it wasn't bad, but not one of the better books that I read that year. I believe we're at number 14 here. And this was definitely a nostalgia read for me because when I was at Barnes and Noble with my wife doing some Christmas shopping, I happened to check out the manga section there. And as I was browsing, I came across this and I thought, oh man, I've always wanted to read that because I loved it as a kid. It was a big staple in my childhood, so I really wanted to check it out. And that book is Yu-Gi-Oh! The manga. Yep, so I was a big Pokemon kid growing up. You know, back in the 4th grade is when I first got into it, and 5th and 6th and 7th grade were very, well, I should say 5th and 6th grade. Getting into 7th grade, liking Pokemon was, kind of lame. So I eventually had moved on to Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'll never forget going to the card shop with my dad and buying my first Yu-Gi-Oh! Pack. And they only had the Japanese cards, so because it wasn't huge at the time, it wasn't very popular at the time, so he only carried the Japanese versions. So I grabbed a pack of the Japanese cards and I brought them to school. And I believe I was only one of 2 kids in the whole school who even knew about Yu-Gi-Oh! I didn't know the other kid at the time. We were never in the same classes, so the friends that I did play with, I had to make up my own rules and what the cards meant and all this stuff. So, it was really cool at the time. And then as I started to pick up the English cards and learn how to really play the game and get into the anime, it was just really cool. But anyway, reading the manga, it was okay. It was okay. It's definitely a lot different than the anime. That's definitely for sure. Pharaoh is much more violent. Like, he literally sets a guy on fire. But like, it's more of like an anthology, I should say. It's a mix of different stories about how Yugi turns into the Pharaoh and how the Pharaoh helps him with these puzzle games, essentially. And, but easily my favorite chapter, like, I think it was chapter 3 within the first volume, I believe, is when the Duel Monsters concept is introduced. And that's where we meet Seto Kaiba, and Yugi and Kaiba duel for the first time. We see the Blue Eyes White Dragon get summoned for the first time. And, that's when it really hit me in the nostalgia feel. So I really wish there was more of that in this book. But I believe after doing some research, it doesn't really heavily start focusing on the card game until volume 7. So I'd have to read the whole second book after this before even getting into what I really want to, which I plan on doing, but, I'm really looking forward to the third book. Alrighty, so that kind of sums it up for the books that were not enjoyable at all to just okay. Now we're going into my favorite reads of the year. And starting in at number 13 is the final classic that I really needed to read, and that was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevens. With a really awesome cover. So I've always really avoided reading this one because, as I've always said, the classics kind of turned me off for some reason. But as I've gotten older and have really wanted to dive more into the roots of horror, it's turned out that I've actually really loved the classics, and they're classic for a reason. And this was the last one I really needed to get into. And, it really kind of blew me away. I was really surprised with how awesome the story was. And it's obviously a story of the duality within man, both the good and bad within us. But I think what's really, really undermined within the story and doesn't get enough attention when this is getting talked about is how the author really hammers that in with, it's this wonderful part where I believe Dr. Jekyll is explaining in his letter, basically he says, evil, I shouldn't say evil, the darker side of man within is needed, because if all that's within me is joy, then what point is there to seek to better myself? And that's something that really stuck with me, because it's, obviously we don't enjoy having dark thoughts or bad feelings within ourselves, but it's a natural part of who we are. Like he said, I think those parts of us are why we strive to be better people in the end. That's why we start to work out. We start to chase our dreams. Maybe, you start to get a better sleep pattern. I think it's really important to not only accept those darker sides of our personality, but to learn how to pinpoint them and work towards improving on them and being okay with them. But really quickly, it came with two other side stories. The first one being Markheim, which was fantastic. Brilliant story about a man who breaks into a store to rob it. He murders the cashier, and then as he's starting to freak out, he gets visited by the devil within in the store. And there's this really intense scene where, I can't even say it's intense, but it completely made my skin crawl, where he's hiding in the room and he hears these footsteps coming up to the room where he's hiding. And as the door opens, a man pokes his head in, looks around, sees him, and just gives him this knowing smile and closes the door again. And that, goosebumps, man, goosebumps. But yeah, great story. The Merry Men I really didn't enjoy, and that's because one of the characters talks with this incredibly heavy Scottish accent, which the author, instead of writing normally and just implying that he does, literally spells it out. So it was really hard to follow what was going on and what was honestly being said. So that was the last story in the book, and that was easily my least favorite. But yeah, overall, this was a wonderful collection. 2 out of the 3 stories were anyway. Okay, water time. Next up is a book that I've not only reviewed, but I have recommended in my 5 horror books to give you chills this winter, which I will also link down in the description down below. And that book is none other than Winter Chill by Joanne Fluke. Again, easily one of my favorite covers in my collection. Winter Chill is the story about this couple who has this very tragic snowmobile accident where their daughter dies and the husband becomes paralyzed from the legs down. When they discover a letter from their daughter inside one of the books, their mother becomes convinced that she's trying to reach them from beyond the grave. And not only that, there starts to be a string of child murders within the town. The husband who's paralyzed is having dreams of walking, and when he wakes up, his legs are incredibly sore, like he had been walking miles. And as the town is suddenly in throes of fear of a serial killer, it's a really, really awesome whodunit. I really don't want to say too much more on it. Again, if you want my full thoughts, feel free to check out my review in the description down below. But this is an absolute recommend if you can find a copy. So let's see, that was 13, 12. Number 11 is Testament by David Marl. So I heard of Testament through the Retro Paperback Horror Art group, and basically someone had likened it to Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and I absolutely love that book. So I knew right away I had to get it before it blew up in price. I'm not sure if it has, but I know I got my copy fairly cheaply. And little fun fact, David Marl is actually the creator of Rambo. I believe his first novel was First Blood, in which he created the Rambo character. made famous later by Sylvester Stallone's role. But Testament is the story of this reporter who is writing this, essentially, like, I don't want to say hit piece, but like this piece about this local crime boss, who ends up getting wind of that work and starts to go after this journalist and his family. And right off the gate, it starts off incredibly dark, like probably one of the darkest openings in a book I've ever read. It was intense, and it genuinely like is pedal to the metal and goes on throughout the whole book. There's a lot of action, a lot of heartbreaking scenes, a lot of tension, and I absolutely recommend checking this book out. Probably one of my favorite parts about it is that it's informative in a way that doesn't feel like that it's trying to teach you something. You know, the author weaves it into importance of the story. Like, one of my favorite parts is the main character is teaching his daughter how to read a topographical map. And not only does the author explain how to do that, but he includes a picture of a topographical map. And he's like, these lines right here are cliff sides. And I'm like, that's something I never knew. And I love that. That's like, I love being able to learn something when I'm reading books. And that is, to me, that's a genius way to teach somebody something without them even realizing it. So yeah, if you can pick up a copy of Testament, absolutely check this out. Nick from the Book Graveyard, if you're watching, I really think you would enjoy this. I know you're big into the men's adventure books, so I really think you would enjoy this one, man. Alrighty. Now we're going into the top 10. I think so. Let me just count real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yep, okay. So, breaking in at number 10 is a book that I genuinely feel is a very underrated gem within the 80s horror. And that book is The Playroom by Gloria Murphy. I do have this book reviewed on my channel if you want to check out my full thoughts, but very briefly, The Playroom is a story about this girl who was bullied in high school. She moves away and comes back as a brand new person and essentially plots her revenge on the people that bullied her. Now, the story, of course, sounds very cliche, very cookie cutter, but when you start to dive into the story, it's the characters that really bring the story to life. They make you care about what's going on. And I personally feel that is a sign of a brilliant author. When you can take a story that's been done a couple dozen, even hundreds of times, and make it original, make it your own, and make the reader genuinely care about what's going on. And not only that, but being able to have an element of excitement, being able to still plant these wonderful seeds of foreshadow that blossom into these awesome twists and turns later on in the story. It really, like I said, I think it's inspiring because if you have an idea, even if it's been done hundreds of times before, it hasn't been done your way. And I think this book explains that brilliantly. So, yeah, if you want to check out my full thoughts, check out my review. This is also, I believe, still fairly cheap to get, so definitely grab a copy. Let me get another sip of water here. Oh, yapping certainly makes me thirsty. Speaking of thirsty, this was my summer blockbuster coming in at number 9. This is a book I had seen mentioned a couple of times last year, and I really wanted to get into it for summer. So that book is none other than The Ceremonies by T.E.D. Klein. So this behemoth of a book is a story about this man named Jeremy who essentially he wants to get away from the busy city life. So he rents a room in this rural town and is working on this paper about the origins of horror literature. Little does he know, he's essentially a pawn in a ceremony in order to resurrect this ancient evil. So yeah. Again, I have this reviewed, but briefly, this was a fantastic story. I really enjoyed it. I think it has a really nice level of immersion because the chapters are actually dates. So there's like, I believe it starts at the beginning of June, and it's a nice way for the reader to follow along. So if you really wanted to, you could read a chapter per date, and you would be done by the beginning of August. So it wouldn't take you too long, and it really adds this nice level of immersion to the story. Not only that, the author's prose is fantastic. It's probably one of the best that I've ever read. It really brings you in there. It's very detailed without feeling bloated. The pacing's fantastic. It does have some flaws, which I do talk about in my review. But overall, I definitely think this is a book that if you're looking for your next summer read, this is a really good one to get into. Alrighty, coming in at number 8 is none other than I Am a Hero by Kengo Hanazawa. Another manga. Again, I have this reviewed, but briefly, I Am a Hero is the story about a character who is a paranoid schizophrenic who is in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. He's one of the only people in the country of Japan to legally own a firearm, and we go through his journey of terror, determining about what's real and what's not. But yeah, this is easily one of the most original takes on zombies that I've ever read. The pacing's fantastic. I love the characters. The imagery is beautiful. I show a lot of that in my review, so go ahead and check that out if you want to see it. It is definitely an expensive series to get into, but if you are genuinely curious, I definitely recommend making an investment in picking up at least the first copy of this. So if you really do want to check it out, it's definitely worth splurging on, and but definitely be prepared to spend a little bit if you want to collect the whole series. Coming in at number 7. This is also another nostalgia read for me, even more so than Yu-Gi-Oh! Was. And I'm sure it's to no one's surprise, but it is none other than Pokemon Adventures, written by Hidenori Kusaka. So again, probably butchered the hell out of that, but I'm sorry. But yeah, this was honestly a lot of fun to read. Pokemon was a huge, huge staple of my childhood. It's how I met my very first best friend. And it was really the first time that I felt this huge adventure that truly engulfed me. It eventually spread into the cards, into the anime. Well, so I started with the games, got into the cards, the anime. So as I was browsing Barnes & Noble, again with my wife, I saw this as well, and I said, I have to read this. I genuinely have to read this. And I'm so happy I did. It made me smile from ear to ear. I felt like a kid again reading this. It was really interesting to see the liberties the author took with making the story his own take. And it was really interesting because it is based off the first game. It goes through the Johto region where you go up to the Elite Four, fight the Pokemon champion. And, but it was interesting, like I said, to see the liberties he took with the main character, Red, his starter being a Poliwag instead of, one of our normal starters. The introduction of Green, who happens to be a female that reminds me a lot of, like, My Valentine from Yu-Gi-Oh! Seeing, the origin of Team Rocket. Seeing the gym leaders actually being a part of Team Rocket was so cool. It was really awesome. Meeting Misty and Brock for the first time. If you're a fan of Pokemon and you've never checked out the manga, I absolutely recommend it. Whether you've only played the card game or you love the video games, at least read the first book. It's really, really, really well done. All right. Coming in at number 6 is one from one of my all-time favorites. You know him. You love him. Stranglehold by Jack Ketchum. So, I don't want to say too much on this because this is actually the last book that I read for 2025, so I do plan on reviewing it. However, it's one of 3 books that I have finished recently. So, I have 3 books in the pipeline to review. What I'm going to do is, after I post this, I will put up a poll this weekend and let you, the viewers, decide what book you want me to review next. So, this will be one of the choices. But, clearly it was good. It just got edged out from my top 5 last year. But clearly it was a really good read. And I'm very excited to share my thoughts and opinions on this with you guys. Next up, we have my top 5 reads of 2025. Coming in at number 5 is none other than Nick Cutter's The Troop. I couldn't find my paperback copy, so this gave me a really good chance to show off my advanced reader's copy that I found at a thrift store. Which, funny enough, I think I've told it before, but I came across it one time at a thrift store and passed it up and really was kicking myself later on for it. And then a year later, I ended up finding it again. So, really happy I got a chance to pick it up that time. But yeah, this was actually my last video, my last review. So, if you want my full thoughts, go ahead and check that out. But yeah, so The Troop essentially is a story about this Scoutmaster and his troop on their annual boys trip on this island away from civilization where they have to go through their ultimate tests. On the first night, an intruder that's infected with this contagious virus comes across their campsite, and it ends up becoming a story of survival for the troop to survive not only the virus, but themselves. So yeah, I love The Troop. It was a reread for me. It was my second reread of last year, and I loved it just as much the second time as I did the first time. It really, again, showed me how versatile and amazing horror can be outside of Stephen King. Cutter does a wonderful job of blending psychological and body horror. There's graphic scenes, but it's never in the manner of shocking you. It does shock you, but it plays into the story. It's not there just to be there. So yeah, definitely check out The Troop by Nick Cutter if you haven't. I like a lot of his work, but this is still easily my favorite one. Coming in at number 4 is another reread for me, which I should say this was actually my second reread, so The Troop was actually my third reread of last year. So, coming in at number 4 is none other than The Rules of the Road by C.B. Jones. So, The Rules of the Road by C.B. Jones is a story about a man who is driving down the highway one night, and he ends up hearing this very strange broadcast in which this lively and plucky broadcaster named Buck Hensley essentially tells him this story of the rules of the road. And he claims that should you not follow the rules, bad things will happen. So after the main character has that experience, he creates a website and reaches out in hopes of reaching out to other people who have had similar experiences. when he starts to be inundated with experiences from around the country, he soon learns that not only was he not the only person who've experienced the sort of phenomenon with Buck Hensley, he learns of the dangers of what happened to those who did not follow the rules. It's a wonderful story. I have it reviewed on my channel if you want my full thoughts. But yes, I absolutely love this book. It's easily one of my favorite books ever written. And it's a really nice thought to know that as much as I do love the classic authors, that the future of horror is in very good hands with authors like Jones here. I'm going to go ahead and leave a link to his website where you can go ahead and purchase some autographed copies. They're very, very affordable, and it's a great way to help support his work, which I highly, highly recommend doing. I listened to the Audible version of this, which I loved. The performer who does Buck Hensley is incredible, and I highly recommend doing the Audible version as it adds this wonderful layer of immersion to the story. As you know, it's not just radio signals that people experience it. There's people listening to Walkmans. There's one chapter where a person's playing a Game Boy and experiences it through that, which is really, really cool. So yeah, if you like epistolary tales, and you like cosmic horror, absolutely, absolutely check out The Rules of the Road by C.B. Jones. I can't recommend this book enough. Water break. Coming in at number 3 is Horrors, edited by Charles L. Grant. Featuring some absolutely banger stories from Stephen King, Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough, William Nolan, and others. So, I found this at a thrift store for about $2 last year, and this is one that's been on my want list for years. So, I was really not only excited to add it to my collection, but instantly dig into it when I got home. And man, am I thrilled that I did. This is easily one of the best short story collections I have ever read. Some of my favorites, A Demon in My View by Melissa Michaels is absolutely brilliant. It's a story about a mother and her son who have survived the rapture and are the last 2 living people on Earth. And that's all I'm going to say, because if I say any more, it will spoil it, even the slightest bit. But when I tell you that the twist in this story is going to punch you in the face, be prepared. I can't think of, honestly, a better short story that I've read out of that one. Let's see. Savory, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme by Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough was also another really brilliant story, and was my first taste of her work, which is why I really enjoy short stories, is because you get a taste for authors' writing styles without making a huge commitment to one of their novels. So, that story is about a teenage girl who falls in love, gets her heart broken, and goes out to see a local witch in the woods to make her a love potion. And it's such an awesome story. It's a really great revenge story. And it comes with a twist that you don't see coming. And the very, every line just builds and builds and builds, even to the very last line in the story that just brilliantly wraps it up. Easily one of my favorites. With another one coming in after it, The Inheritance by Alan Dean Foster. Again, my first time with his work. If you're unfamiliar, he wrote Alien, so... and you'll see why through that short story. It's a really nice story. Shouldn't say nice. It's a really terrifying story of this woman who's dating this very rich old man. It's, very typical story. She's slowly poisoning him to get his inheritance. But in his will, he writes that she has to take care of his cat for a certain amount of years. Should anything happen to the cat, she loses the money. Again, that's all I'm going to say, because as the story unfolds, it just gets insanely crazy. There's Dahlberger from Lisa Tuttle right after that, which was good. I can't remember what the whole thing right off the top of my head. The Pool by William Nolan was good too. And then it ends with The Monkey by Stephen King. But yeah, if you can get a copy of this, this is not only worth having in your collection, but absolutely worth picking up as soon as you pick it up in the mailbox. Cancel whatever you're doing, sit down and read it. I also recommend it as a book to keep in your car. I always keep one in my car, usually an anthology or something, something I can dig into, God forbid I ever get stuck in traffic, or if I'm sitting in a waiting room, or I know I'm going to be, waiting somewhere for a little while. It's a good way to get a chunk of reading in without the huge commitment of, needing to end on a chapter or something. So definitely check this one out. Coming in at number 2 is Fantastic Land by Mike Bachoven. I have this reviewed on the channel. But Fantastic Land is a story about the story of a theme park, Fantasticland, that was built in order to rival Disneyland. It's a story about how the employees of Fantasticland are essentially trapped and stranded on the theme park after this major hurricane hits and floods the park, cutting them off from civilization. And it's a story about the dangers of addiction to social media, the sort of the danger of the standard by mentality, and but not only that, is a really interesting tale of how one story can be told in so many ways. But yeah, the reason it really hit number 2 on my list for last year is because this is the first book I've ever reread in my life. Last year was definitely very financially hard on my family. It was tough, especially around the holidays. So, I honestly haven't gone book shopping since probably July or August. So hence why there haven't been any haul videos or anything like that. But, not to make this a sob story or anything. Like I said, I'm not looking for pity or anything like that. Everyone's having a hard time. But that's when I decided to kind of look back at my Audible catalog when I had to cancel my membership for a while, and decided, you know what? Why not dig into some of my old favorites? And that's when I decided to listen to this. And, it really made me realize why people reread books. Because it really is kind of like discovering it for the first time again. You find stuff that not only do you remember being awesome, but you pick up on a lot of things you didn't the first time or even genuinely forgot. So, yeah, not only is it a wonderful story that I think you should read, it really kind of opened my eyes to the pleasures of rereading old favorites. All right, water break. And coming in at number 1, my absolute favorite read for 2025 is Goodnight Moon by Jack McLean. I have a full review of this on my channel, but Goodnight Moon is a story about this couple who ends up having a son who is showing clear signs of becoming a serial killer. When his father decides to lock him away in the basement, he tries to live a normal life. 10 years later, his son breaks out of the basement, and is starting to wreak havoc amongst the neighborhood. So the reason Goodnight Moon hits number 1 on my list is, given that concept that I've just given to you, what do you assume? You would assume a nice, trashy horror, slasher film kind of vibe from this, right? well, you would be right in half of the sense. What you also get with this is a deep look into nature versus nurture. You know, our antagonist, and I use that word very loosely, Harry, is sort of a character that was doomed from the start. So, it's really interesting that we get a look into Harry's mind about why he's doing what he's doing, alongside of how he got to be the way he was. So it's a book that really does a good job of making a character complex in a way that, yes, they do horrible things, but you also have some sympathy for them. I go into more detail that in my review, but I really loved Goodnight Moon because it's a book that screams absurdity, both with its cover and its concept, but really pulls you in with its story and makes you question yourself as a reader on how you look at antagonists as a whole. But yeah, so that was my 2025 in books. I really, really had a good time with it. I read a lot of good stuff, some not great stuff, and some inspiring stuff. I think with how kind of crappy 2025 was, I think with this new year, I really want to work on improving a lot of things. I got really inspired the other day when I was bringing my daughter to school, and it was just me and her. She's usually the last one I bring to school, and she just kind of looked at me and she said, Dad, I really don't like when people say they don't like their lives. She's like, because I love my life, and especially because you're in it. And it just really made me feel good because, like I said, dealing with, the issues that I do, it's hard to sort of accept that. And, that was just kind of sort of like a turning point for me in learning that I can't accept that kind of love from people. I deserve that. And that, I always hated that people said, new year, new me kind of thing, like as if everything changes simply because the year has changed. And in a way I was right, but in the completely wrong way that I thought. Things don't change simply overnight because it's a new year. Things change because you make small steps in improving that change. And that's going to be my goal for this year. Is to make the small changes that I need to start being happier with myself and being able to accept love from other people. To quote Whitley Strieber's Communion, I owe it to the people who love and depend on me to be happy. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate your time. Feel free to drop a quick like on my video. It really helps. Check out some of my other stuff down in the description below. And until the next time, I really hope you all have a great new year, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, be kind to yourselves. Bye, everyone.